Violent video games have been around for just about as long as video games themselves have. Even back in the early 70s when they were still first gaining popularity, the more vile and abhorrent ones were criticized endlessly. An early example of this is Death Race, a game where you run over gremlins in a car. Despite being insanely tame by today's standards, the game was dubbed as gross, morbid, insidious, and sick by the United States Safety Council and was removed from arcades. However, one of the most famous examples for my North American viewers would be the 1993 to 1994 United States Senate hearings on video games. You know, the thing responsible for the ESRB. The hearings were called to discuss the psychological effects on violence in video games on youth, and consisted of debates over the games Night Trap for its apparent encouragement of harming women, Doom for its over-the-top graphic violence, and Mortal Kombat for its realistic depictions of gore and violence. Despite the push to censor video games and the amount of backlash that violent video games brought, the creators of these games didn't back down. One team, tired of making family-friendly video games for children, made a company of their own to create the kinds of games that they themselves would want to play. This company, Running with Scissors, went on to create one of the most violent video games they could, Postal. The term going postal was coined in 1993 after a string of unrelated shootings committed by post office workers at their place of work, and the term is certainly a fitting name for the game. Postal is a game about a mentally ill man in a trench coat shooting up his town, a place ironically named Paradise. You go through the streets killing police, executing people, and even taking the easy way out if you're surrounded and choose to do so. The game released in 1997 to a wave of backlash and hate. Running with Scissors received hundreds of hate letters. The game was banned in 14 countries. American retail stores like Walmart refused to sell the game, and US Senator Joe Lieberman called it one of the worst things in American society, along with Calvin Klein underwear and Marilyn Manson. Welcome to the state of US politics. The game starts like most of my favorites do. Once you're through the menu and through a loading screen, you're in the game and gotta figure out what to do and how to do it all on your own. The only help the game gives you is a prompt at the top of the screen saying to kill the hostiles and a population counter with a percentage. You start outside of a home with nothing but a machine gun, a shotgun behind you, and a good chunk of your town's police force in front of you. From here, your two objectives are to kill and try not to be killed. The only people you actually have to kill are the police and the other armed individuals trying to cause you harm. The innocents can be completely left alone, and if you somehow play the whole game without a single one dying, you get an achievement. Once you've killed a certain number of hostiles, usually 80 to 90%, you can press F1 to go to the next level and continue the carnage. You fight your way from the quiet suburbs of Paradise into the outskirts of town, continuing through a parade deeper in. Later, you fight your way from a trailer park to a train station, hitching a ride to an ostrich farm of all places. Then later, through a mine in one of my favorite levels, to the ghetto, then to the city proper, fighting all the way to the end at the Air Force Base. The deeper into the city you get, the more enemies there will be, and the more heavily armed they'll be as well. The game plays like a twin-stick shooter with pretty clunky controls that would be fine for a first-person shooter, WASD to move, mouse to aim, and numbers 1 through 9 for weapons, but they don't exactly translate well to the isometric levels of the game, even worse so on levels like The Bridge, which is from a complete top-down perspective. I find the most difficult thing about the controls to be keeping my eyes on the reticle, but that's because it often disappears behind things in the environment. However, once you're used to the controls, the gameplay loop is actually pretty fun. Definitely better played in shorter settings, but still fun nonetheless. The deeper you get into the city, the more powerful weaponry you yourself get, including a rocket launcher, napalm launcher, flamethrower, and my personal favorite, the automatic shotgun, as well as a few different types of grenades and Molotov cocktails. The machine gun has infinite ammo, making it a very reliable weapon. However, it becomes less accurate the further away your target is. The shotgun is pretty great at close range, tearing people apart, and still okay at medium range, taking only a few shots to put someone down. However, in crowds, it's an especially efficient tool. The thing is, its range is noticeably less than that of your rifle. And the one thing that I don't really like about the basic shotgun is that when you shoot it, you have to stand completely still, unlike with other weapons. The rocket launcher is one of my favorites in the game. It comes with both normal and heat-seeking rockets, which are great for some of the enemies hidden behind walls. Anytime there's a group of enemies huddled up around some exploding barrels, or even just huddled up in general, I fire a rocket into that and it takes care of it rather quickly. And the next two weapons are fire-related. The napalm grenade launcher and flamethrower. The napalm grenade launcher fires, well, napalm grenades that make giant pools of fire, and the flamethrower is a flamethrower. Any enemy caught on fire dies, so these are both very useful weapons. However, you need to be careful. Any enemy who catches on fire can run into you catching you on fire, so be sure to use from a safe distance. Last but certainly not least is the auto shotgun, also known as the spray cannon. It's not supposed to be one of the last weapons that you pick up, but my dumbass didn't get it on the 3rd level like you're supposed to. It fixes my only grudge with the shotgun, that being that you can't walk and fire at the same time. The auto shotgun lets you run and gun for as long as you have ammo, which won't be very long because of its immensely fast fire rate. but it's easily my favorite weapon in the game. However, all of this firepower wouldn't be anything without a group of enemies to shoot it at. The two most common you'll be running into are the police officers and sheriffs. They take a few shots to put down, with the sheriffs having a little bit more health. They can carry pistols, machine guns, shotguns, and even auto shotguns depending on how deep into the game you are and on what difficulty you're playing. Then there's the Rocketeer. These bullet sponge fucks can shoot heat-seeking rockets at you, and if they're at just the right distance from you, they can stun lock you by knocking you to the floor over and over again. If you press right mouse, you can lay down and dodge the rockets, or just step out of the way of them, but getting stun locked is a possibility. And for the last of the human enemies, we have the Grenader and their rarer variant, the Miner. The Grenader throws Molotovs, grenades, and dynamite, whereas their rarer and weaker cousins only throw dynamite. They can be dangerous, but as long as you're always moving, they shouldn't be too big of an issue. The last enemy in the game is the sentry turret, and oh my god, do I hate these things. They can fire any kind of ammo at the player: napalm grenades, flamethrower, auto shotgun, or missiles, and they have heat-seeking missiles too. They go down to a simple explosion, but when one of them is just slightly off screen shooting at you, they can be a real problem. The ending of Postal comes as a cutscene disguised as a level, and outside of some text on pre-level loading screens, comes as our only source of in-game story. The loading screens don't seem to have any sort of real meaning at first, however I have a theory which will be explained later. The final level is, oh my fucking god. Thankfully this is just a cutscene, but still. The Postal Dude, yes that's his name, steps onto the grounds of an elementary school and fires. However, none of his weapons work. Again he tries, but nothing happens until he drops to his knees. He later wakes up in a mental hospital, locked in solitary confinement. A news reporter starts talking about him and his situation. They state that they're unsure why he committed the acts that he did, and insinuate that maybe the stresses of modern life simply threw him over the edge. Now, while this may be where the game ends, it's certainly not where the story does. The physical release of the game came with a manual, as most do. However, this one contained something special, a diary written from the perspective of the Postal Dude, with an entry set before each level. Level 1. House. Moving to Paradise was a tragic mistake. People here are sick. I hear gunshots, screams after dark. Now the phone call saying I'm being thrown out of this home. My house. Wearing Kevlar vest and carrying a sidearm at all times now. Level 2. Worst fears confirmed. Group of lunatics tried to invade my home. Must get to the truck stop and sheriff. See if anyone there can help me. Afraid only God can help me now. Level 3. The outskirts. Like animals, even the sheriff. Everyone here is infected with something. Something in the air or the water. Don't know. Maybe from the Air Force Base? Hope not. That base may turn out to be my last hope. The Postal Dude is fully convinced after being evicted from his home that the police outside are random lunatics trying to hurt him. He then seeks out the sheriff's help on the second level, only to find out that they're also hostile to him, and starts to think that some sort of sickness is being spread by the US Air Force. By level 7 and 8, his diary, now labeled a war journal, conveys the message that he fully believes the US Air Force is spreading this hate virus and intends to do something about it. Now, I'm certainly no psychologist, and I'm absolutely not someone capable of making a mental health diagnosis. However, in my limited knowledge of the human brain and mental illnesses, this sounds to me like some sort of paranoid schizophrenia. The Postal Dude is very obviously delusional in believing that the Air Force is spreading a hate virus, especially since the only person acting crazy and hurting other people without reason is him. It's also very heavily implied that he's hearing a voice in his head. Throughout the game, a number of voice lines can be heard from the Postal Dude calling people a sissy, laughing, or sarcastically asking someone, did that hurt, after shooting them. In the game's files, these recordings aren't listed under Postal Dude. They're listed under Demon, whereas the recordings of the Postal Guy's pain grunts are. They were also recorded by completely different people. The Postal Dude's pain grunts were made by Mike Desi, whereas the voice of the Demon is that of Rick Hunters. None of the actual words spoken by the Postal Dude during gameplay are spoken by him verbally. They all come from this demon in his head. Going back to my theory about the loading screens, they say things like, the earth is hungry, its heart throbs and demands cleansing, or blessed are the meek, for they make for easy targets, with dates accompanying them. I don't believe that these are the words of the Postal Dude. The dates and random strings of dark and edgy thoughts make this feel like it could be someone's journal entry. However, the Postal Dude is already keeping a journal. I believe the words on the loading screens are those of the demons, talking in between levels. This is somewhat reinforced by the fact in some original artwork for the game, the Postal Dude is seen backed into a corner, clutching his weapon in his arms. He doesn't look happy or entertained by what he's doing. In fact, he looks restless and terrified. Again, he fully believes that he's surrounded by sick lunatics, infected by a hate virus and trying to kill him. The 7th level's loading screen says, I don the eviscerated organs of my enemies as party hats, wear their shredded entrails as neckties, and oh, how I shall dance. But that's just not the Postal Dude talking. At least I genuinely don't believe it is. The ending of Postal, while deeply disturbing, holds a clear message. Despite the fact that something is clearly psychologically wrong with the Postal Dude, once he's caught, his motive is brushed off as unknown, and possibly influenced by the stresses of modern life. That despite his diary turned war journal showing clear signs of paranoid delusions, and at least a state of psychosis, and the fact that he has a voice in his head that's referred to as a demon that's potentially telling him what to do, he just flew off the hinges. A stark reality that the actual causes and roots of mental health will often be ignored in an attempt to find an easy scapegoat. And unfortunately, Postal's point was proven, scarily accurately. 2 years after the release of Postal, the Columbine High School massacre would take place. I'm sure I don't have to explain to you what this event was, but in case you don't know, it was one of the deadliest school shootings in American history. It was carried out by Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, who, after the event, were dead. No clear motive was established. It was later brought to the public's attention that they were both avid gamers, and that specifically Doom was an obsession for Eric. The game was subsequently blamed heavily for the shootings on the premise that it had had major psychological effects on the two individuals. The similarities between the end of Postal and the events of the massacre are terrifying, even down to the point that both the motives of the Postal Dude and the motives of Eric and Dylan were for the most part unknown to the public, and that blame was put on things that were blatantly not connected instead of just addressing the obvious mental health issues that were in place beforehand. It predicted in some manner what would happen and how people would react to it without even trying. The only reason Postal ended at the elementary school was because Running with Scissors wanted to leave you horrified and disturbed. While these types of events had happened before, they weren't exactly commonplace. And seeing this happen in a video game at the time had to be crazy. I mean, I took a double take when the name of the level popped up. In the years following the game's release, these kind of events have become a lot more commonplace, to the point where Running with Scissors openly said that the meaning behind the end of the game had been lost. It was no longer a horrifying thought and was now something that happened a lot. Because of this, in the 2016 remake of the game, Postal Redux, instead of ending at the elementary school, Postal Dude ends up at his own funeral, watching his own casket being lowered into the ground, before passing out and ending up at the mental hospital like in the original game. The levels of controversy surrounding Postal actually ended up helping it in the long run. Despite the fact that the game wasn't being sold in most retail stores, Running with Scissors was able to sell the game over the internet, and people like Joe Lieberman publicly bashing the game led to a public interest in it, somewhat of a Streisand effect. In 1998, an expansion for the game entitled Postal Special Delivery was released, coming with 4 new levels. Starting in a nondescript retail store, the demon in Postal Dude's head says, "What do you mean you don't sell Postal?" before firing his weapons. You then fight through the store to a shanty town, going through a part of the city hit by an earthquake where you can find naked people, and eventually end up at an old folks home. Yikes. The levels aren't exactly anything special, just a bit more Postal, but they're just as fun as the base game. Then in 2000, a Japanese release of the game called Super Postal came out. 2 new Japanese levels set in Tokyo and Osaka came with it, and they make me uncomfortable, at least more so than the rest of this game does. Something that I haven't mentioned up until this point is that while you're committing your acts of violence, the pedestrians scream out. While in the normal levels, what they're saying is in English and somewhat humorous, at least humorous following this game's sick, twisted, dark comedy. Things like, "We should have gone to Disneyland," or "Has anyone seen my ear?" will be yelled out by the pedestrians. However, in the Japanese levels, I can't understand what they're saying. And whereas the English voice lines have some of that 90s game level voice acting, whoever did the Japanese voices actually sound like they're screaming out in pain. It's deeply unsettling. Multiplayer functionality does exist for Postal, but it's such a pain in the ass. Unless you're on the same network as whoever you're playing with, there is no server browser. So if you want to play with someone who isn't in your house, you gotta do some port forwarding and connect to their IP. It's a whole thing. If you are able to figure it out though, there's cooperative play and even deathmatch. It was a bit laggy when I played it, but it's still fun nonetheless. Postal is a psychological horror game. It's meant to leave you feeling weird and icky, but it throws in just enough dark humor to keep it from being sad. It's a commentary on mental health and mental illnesses, and how their root causes are often ignored for easy-to-blame scapegoats. It portrayed violence in a way never really seen in gaming before, and took itself places that even games today don't really dare to, and it said something while doing it. Ironically, the same kind of people who wanted to get rid of Postal and censor it, ignoring the message it sent, were the same kind of people who blamed Doom when Postal's point was proven. Despite the hate mail they got, all of the controversy they faced, and even a multi-year court battle with the United States Postal Service over the game's name, Running with Scissors didn't back down. In 2003, after that lawsuit was over, they released a sequel to the game, one that had just as much commentary and as much controversy as the first, and one that we'll cover in a later video. Until then, thanks for watching.